question, how does that innovation challenge work? Are there guidelines, or people can just go out and do what they wish, essentially? Or?
Yeah. So how it works is projects that are currently being rated, you could talk to your case manager and say, I'd like to do this Sustainable Site Facilities Innovation Challenge. And then there's effectively like a credit written. So you're familiar with the rating scheme? Yeah. So there's effectively a credit written that says, oh, it's not up there anymore, but basically says, take the specs, which I'm sure we'll hear about a bit later, won't we? Yes? Take the specs, which we'll hear about later. And there are like standard specs, and then there's, next step specs. Level 1 is the standard, level 2 is the optional extras. And so if you are to achieve those specs, then you're awarded level 1, 1 point, level 2, 2 points.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just with the ratings, when you're talking 2 points, how does that build up overall in the scheme?
Yeah, okay, so there's 100 points in the scheme, and nobody's ever gotten 100, so 100 points is very ambitious, and this challenge is worth 2 points, which is actually quite significant. Some whole credits are worth 2 points.
No materiality, that is...
No, just 2 points, standard 2 points, yeah.
So a question for Lindsay about the clients in the contractors group. So when we've been on our journey about trying to lift some of the standards of our site sheds, often we're told that, well, buildings is special. Buildings is like a smaller part of the market. In terms of the broader construction industry, is this an issue that you're seeing more and more with the large-scale engineering projects that might have more remote or regional kind of offices where these sheds are put in there? They're kind of like the only available office working space in a kind of regional area. How are you seeing the uptake of those kinds of contractors?
Obviously, in more remote facilities, there are going to be some particular complexities in how you work it. But from our perspective, we see those areas as being really fundamental to achieving the outcomes that you're looking for. And especially when you're looking at it from the viewpoint that there are many people operating on a fly-in, fly-out basis, and they're under particular personal stress and pressure, which they may not necessarily want to open up to various people about, and especially employers perhaps. But by getting involved in this and providing those types of facilities that are focused on what really works for the staff, all of a sudden you start to get a quantum change in how projects are actually operating. And it's all about the interaction and collaboration between people working in those projects, if you're in the remote areas. But if you bring it closer to the major cities, we would also see this as developing into a range of perhaps complementary approaches when it comes to major projects. And obviously, it's not just in the sense of what ACA members and their projects might relate to. We want to work with other parts of the industry to achieve those outcomes in that area as well. So if you look at large infrastructure projects that are metropolitan based, for example, they are going to generate a lot of development up and down the corridors that they run through. So what we want to see happen, and what we'll also be working with major clients, governments particularly, is then looking at how you develop precinct type works. And Westmead is a good example, the Westmead Hospital precinct, where the government agencies involved have now a much greater, more effectively integrated approach to what's happening. And they're dealing with the private sector, the contractors and others in a different way, because the operations of the department agencies recognises the benefits of a better collaboration. So what we're trying to also do here is pull apart that adversarial approach which has been there for too long. And if you look at overseas jurisdictions, they've recognised those issues and they've solved them in many ways. But we haven't here. So what we're trying to do is achieve a change which pulls that back so that you do get collaboration amongst contractors, amongst subcontractors, employees and clients, so that you can actually sit down and deal with issues before they become disputes and everything else. So if you've created, the way the ACA board sees it, if you've created an environment on site which is acceptable and positive, etc., then you're going to have much more chance of dealing with those issues on a long-term basis. And that brings into that question of work-life balance and things like 5-day work weeks, job sharing. Why can't it be done? It's only a question of the discussion that industry has with major clients in terms of how is the project going to operate. If we're forcing people into a situation where they have to work 7 days a week to meet various time deadlines and other issues, and not look at how you can actually configure the project differently up front before you start, then we're not going to get there. So that's what this is part of, that whole matrix of where we go in changing the culture. But we have to take everyone with us, because you can't just do it by yourself, because everyone then says, oh, well, it's not going to work because of cost or process or whatever. So we need everyone involved, and that's why it's very important that we've had a lot of support from major government agencies in New South Wales and Victoria on what we're working on as far as procurement and related matters are concerned. And it goes into skills and everything else, and I know we've got a representative or more, probably more than one from TAFE and RTOs. They're part of this process as well. So it all will fit more closely into a wider approach, which we will unfold in 2018 as we start to make announcements about approaches that we're going to make. So it's a bit long-winded, but
Yeah,
I'm trying to put it in perspective.
Yeah.
You know?
Can I clarify one point I think you're
Sure.
making in there then, is that the client actually is going to drive a more standardised site accommodation standard, so that you don't get this situation where one contractor has great accommodation and another contractor doesn't, and they're kind of like they paid a bit more. It just
Yes.
standardising so everyone's got a similar kind of
That's
level
right.
of quality.
Yeah, yeah, and we want everyone to work out, as I'm sure they will, accept and understand that, but having a consistent approach in that whole area is going to be beneficial for everybody. Yeah, because that's the whole thing. As you know, major contractors employ a lot of people, but on a big project they may not employ directly 75% of the people that come to that site. So you've got to work out how you address the issues for subcontractors and other visitors in a way which works for them. And you want those organisations to then start to talk amongst themselves in terms of how they can work a better approach with their employees. So if they see the major contractors doing it, there's more likelihood that others will say, okay, if the head contractors are doing it, then we should follow. But ACA members have accepted that it's not a competitive issue from their perspective. This is all about lifting the industry and deepening its operation, widening the number of people that work in it, upskilling them and giving them a better work-life balance.
Just like to pick up on that point and just ask you how you've managed to get the ACA members to shift. I think getting all those construction companies together on a single thing like this is impressive, so well done. What I'm trying to understand is the comment about the shift away from it not being a competitive advantage to have cheaper site facilities or anything. Because one of the challenges we have as an industry is understanding, well, how real is this? How are you actually going to pull this off and make sure that it doesn't become a competitive issue? So I'd really like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, okay. I guess if I look at the board of the ACA, one of the constitutional rules essentially is that every member must have its chief executive or equivalent as a director of the board. So there are 20 members of ACA. I have 20 managing directors on that board. So you can imagine what the quarterly board meetings can be like, possibly. In the marketplace, they probably would fight like cat and dog to win projects. When they sit around the board table, they start to say, but reality is, if the industry is doing well, we're doing well. And they're now looking at it in a totally different light, because they're really saying that unless they lead the industry down the relevant paths that have to happen, they won't get those changes. And they'll be constantly having to deal with all of the difficulties that the industry has been faced over the last decades. So I guess it's time for a change, and that's what they want to do. So they realise that if they operate in a competitive environment in doing that, they're not going to achieve it. So that's why they're highlighting the various areas that will make a difference across the industry, as opposed to in sectors that they may work in specifically. So it's interesting in that sense, because some of the major contractors operate more in certain subsectors than others do, but they accept that they have to pull together on all aspects of that. And that also is the same situation in safety, it's the same in commercial risk and other issues that we're working on now with governments to address. So I know you might say, yeah, okay, we've heard this before, and I have too, but I think that you'll find that there is a real change that's going to be spearheaded by ACA going forward. And hopefully, in 12 months' time, perhaps we'll have another one of these meetings and you'll come up to me and say, you know what, you were right, it is happening. And I'll be very pleased if you did that. You might come up to me and say, it's not. But I don't think you'll say that. But that's the quantum change that is really a difference here.